Welcome to the show. It's good to be here. We are covering the NewsNation special that occurred today. That was an hour long, and I'm going to cover my thoughts, some of the quotations, paraphrased largely, and give you my impression. So let me start with giving some criticism by Renate from Norway. And the reason I want to start with some criticism is because I like her criticism. Her criticism is valid, and she said it in a very respectable way, not in an angry or entitled way, which I think is just so unnecessary from my perspective. Why would anyone get angry over this special? You know, we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with a phenomenon that intentionally obfuscates, hides itself from humanity, allows governments to get smoking gun, but apparently makes it intentionally difficult for the public to get smoking gun evidence. The dynamics of the situation we're swimming in is so complex and nuanced that maybe it's not appropriate to become so upset if a documentary or a NewsNation special doesn't live up to your expectation. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, I'm certainly open to criticism of my perspective. I'm just telling you from my subjective biased perspective. We're all biased. I'm not going to rush tonight. I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to try not to talk too fast because I have that tendency and I want to overcome that. So here is Renate's criticism from Norway, and I quote from her Twitter. For disclosure, in my opinion, this interview was one step forward and one step back. Status quo, the same. The reason being, for the people not seasoned in this topic, the consciousness connecting to an entity, that description was a stretch too far. And politicians will want to avoid it altogether. Make no mistake. We need them for achieving disclosure. I am happy to be wrong, though. So that's a valid criticism because this special did go very deeply into the woo. However, maybe we have to go into the woo. If the phenomenon itself encompasses woo, and we pretend that it only encompasses nuts and bolts, and that it has nothing to do with consciousness, and it has nothing to do with telepathy, and has nothing to do with capabilities and experiences that are beyond our normal range of experience as human beings, then maybe we're being completely dishonest about the phenomenon. And if all of that encompasses the phenomenon, then maybe it's high time that we told it like it is. It's already been 7 years since the New York Times article. I think we have gone along in a very responsible and iterative way. So why not get deeper into the weeds if the weeds actually exist and are part of the phenomenon itself? So I don't have a problem with the woo that was part of this presentation. Woo is in everything, by the way. Woo is in meditation. Woo is in near-death experiences. Woo is in being in the zone as an athlete. Woo seems to be something so intrinsic to our everyday experience. And maybe it's not every moment, but many of us have had experiences we can't explain, telepathic messages, precognitive dreams, out-of-body experiences, premonitions. Many of us have experienced these things. It's a part of our reality. Are we supposed to talk about UFOs? But even though those woo things are a part of our everyday reality, we have to pretend like they're never consistent or occurring with the UFO phenomenon. That doesn't make sense to me. We got to cut it out. Look, this is just my opinion, but maybe the universe is much weirder than we're promoting scientifically, historically, and just in general. I've had my own completely unambiguous anomalous experience when I was 14. I received a telepathic message. I wrote a whole article about it. You can check it out in my Medium, but many people have had these experiences. We just have to be honest. We can't pretend that UFOs are exclusively nuts and bolts and just weird science. Maybe it's, and by the way, everything is science, right? everything is science. What we don't understand, we call woo. But if science ever began to understand it, it would just be part of fundamental reality and it would just be science. Okay. So let's go into something Jake Baker said. For some reason, I struggle remembering his name. I hope that's his name. It's Jake Baker. That'd be embarrassing if I got that wrong. But he said this at the end of the special. He said, and look, I was writing it down as quickly as I could because I was writing down notes while watching it. So please forgive me if I get anything wrong because I think that's inevitable. I need to do a disclosure burp. Can you hold on? Excuse me. He said, I'm not here to make anyone believe. No, let me set you up. So Ross Coulthart asked Jake Baker something like, do you really expect people to believe this? How are people going to believe you? And Jake Baker responded to the best of my quotation, and I quote, I'm not here to make anyone believe in anything. It's exhausting. You will know us by our fruits. Stay tuned in and watch what our new project will do and prepare to be dazzled. So I really like this quote by Jake Baker, who was the main whistleblower in this special. And the reason I like this so much is because he's putting himself on the line. He is saying, don't believe me. Believe me on account of what's to come, but don't believe me merely on the NewsNation special. And in my tweet that I tweeted out, I said myself, I don't have blind belief. But at the same time, I was very impressed by this special. I found his testimony compelling, and he was backed up by 3 elite special forces operators. So he wasn't like coming at this alone and having no corroboration. And it was very woo-oriented. But look, maybe that's what happened to him. Maybe the things that he said happened to him actually did happen to him. So what is he supposed to do? Pretend that they didn't? What do you want? What do you expect of him? Do you expect of him to water it down? Is that what you want? You want him to water down his testimony so that you don't feel uncomfortable or so that you don't perceive that it's hurting the UFO transparency cause? I think that's ridiculous. Now, is he lying? He could be. Is he LARPing? He could be. Is he mistaken or deluded? He could be. I don't know. I wasn't there. How could I make such a claim? I wasn't there. But I do think his testimony was compelling. He did not give me the perception that he was lying. I didn't see red flags in the way he said things. He didn't come off like he had illusions of grandeur or he felt he was the chosen one. It felt to me like someone who's like, man, I had some weird experiences. I didn't ask for this. I didn't pray for this. I didn't request this, but it happened to me, and I'm going to tell my story. Okay, let me take a sip of some disclosure soda. One moment. Okay. Oh, so let's get into the nuts, the weeds, or the meat and potatoes of the special. I'm going to do the best I can. I want to paraphrase it whenever I can. As you probably know, he's known about he claims he's known that that UAP, some of them stem from NHI for more than 10 years. He was an aerospace mechanic in the late 90s. Then he was recruited into Air Force Special Operations known as Combat Control. I didn't have time to research, but I think Combat Control might be like a tier 1 military operation. I don't know, but it's very elite. He ended up in a non-official capacity working for the DOD, and I think it was defense contractors. So there are 3 people, which we can call colleagues, that backed him up. One was Don Paul Bales, who said I would trust him with my life. Another was Fred Baker, both, I think, former Delta Force members. And then Lieutenant Colonel John Bilch, former Green Beret and former Delta Force sniper. Okay, let's be honest. That's not trivial. We have to be honest. If we're going to be hyper skeptical, that's fine. Let's have arguments clash. But it's dishonest to try to construct the very best argument you can that this is all nonsense, and then intentionally try to neuter the arguments that give it weight. That's just dishonest. That's not intellectual honesty. So I would argue that the three people corroborating his story are impressive, point blank. And for them to corroborate it the way he did and go public the way they did demonstrates they're not putting on airs, in my opinion. Do you think they want to just ruin their reputations? What do you think? They're going to get a movie deal out of this? And they're like, they were speaking to Paramount Studios, and Paramount's like, yeah, guys, listen, I know you risked your life for the United States government. I know that you were part of the Delta Force, the most elite military special forces operation unit in the United States military, basically the NBA of the military, right? Or the NFL, if you want to look at it that way. But would you lie on behalf of whistleblower Jake Barber? Because if you do, we're going to give you a huge deal at a movie. Like, some of you probably think this. You've become so skeptical, you're not thinking straight. So I just straight out of the tunnel, like the NFL athletes run out of the tunnel. Straight out of the tunnel, I want to say it is noteworthy and it is significant that he had 3 high caliber people corroborating his story. It's so easy to overlook that, but that is an objectively big deal. Okay, let's continue. So he said that everything changed around 9/11. He left the Air Force. He was sent out to California. And it was here that it was like and bear in mind, I'm doing the best I can. I took notes while it was going live. I didn't watch it after the fact and take notes and pause and take notes and pause. Let's continue. So he left the Air Force, sent out to California. And I'm looking down every now and then to make sure that audio didn't stop or we're still good. Let me put this up like that. That will actually help me. Okay, so he was sent to California to establish a cover. So what I understand is so that his real objective or profession or professional mandate would not be made public. So he was made as an independent contractor so that he could serve in the capacity of what was coming down the line next, which led to the UAP subject. He was contracted as a helicopter pilot, assigned to a team to retrieve crashed aircraft, but not just conventional. Obviously, non-human, alleged. Let me emphasize alleged, because I don't want anyone claiming that I'm saying this actually happened. I'm not saying that, but I'm open-minded. Alleged non-human craft. But also conventional craft. Now, what's really interesting, this is so confusing, and I can't wait to see people look into this and give their best opinion and analysis over the coming days. But this area he would call the range. And he wouldn't say where the range is, I guess out of respect to the U.S. government. But it sounds to me like this is some kind of military testing range, like Area 51. So the question is, if it is a testing range, why are UAP or non-human intelligence craft crashing at military testing ranges? I mean, that's incredible if that's true, right? Sounds far-fetched, but let me remind you, the universe has no obligation to make sense to you. So bear that in mind as we move forward. So as he's starting this new era of his career, he starts seeing interesting objects at the range. They're making anomalous movements, changing colors and shapes. The objects would come from the ground. Now, here it gets really interesting. The objects would come from the ground or ridge or could pass through them. So they were transmedium. And I'm not going to keep saying allegedly. You already know I said allegedly, right? So anytime I say something, it's allegedly. Let's get that clear. Okay. where was I? So yeah. Okay, so the objects would come, let me use my cursor. Why wasn't I doing that before? The objects would come from the ground or ridge. I think what he was suggesting is like they would come from they would come from under the ground into reality, or from like a mountain ridge into reality, and then that they could pass through them as well. So they had a next level transmedium capability. The aircraft, alleged non-human intelligence aircraft could disappear, they could change color, and they could change shape. So he's going straight for the 3-point shot at the end of the NBA finals here when it comes to the UFO discussion, right? Like we are heading into the weirdest of the weird when it comes to the UAP topic. We thought that when David Grush came forward, our man David Grush, we thought when he came forward, he was bringing the heat. You know what I'm saying? That he was taking us to a new gear. But Jake Baker's like, nah, son, we taking this even further. That's what Jake Baker said. So these craft seem to have otherworldly capabilities. Transmedium, not in just the traditional sense like water, but going through physical objects. At least that's what he claims. I wasn't there. Okay. I think Ross Coulthart asked him, the moment you realized you were involved in retrieval of non-human intelligence tech, when was that? And he responded, the first time our communication and process procedures were modified. What does that even mean? The first time our communication and process procedures were modified. What I assume that means is special protocols were initiated that seemed unnecessary for what would be considered conventional craft. Especially if they're crashing on a range, presumably in the United States of America. So they're obviously not dealing with Russian or Chinese aircraft. It seems to me that if this range is in the United States, I don't know. I assume that it is. Maybe I shouldn't assume that it is. That what he retrieves is either test aircraft that are being developed out of places like Area 51. If they crash, obviously you want to get them quickly. You don't want a foreign government somehow getting hold of it in any way, even just fragments of it, because it could have special coding on it for stealth capabilities. But they weren't. But him and his team were not only retrieving conventional aircraft, because it wasn't only conventional aircraft that were landing in the range. It was non-human aircraft. He said specifically referencing one encounter he had at night. He said it had no engine that he could perceive, no thermal signature regarding the egg. He picked it up with his helicopter. So it was a crash. It was a genuine crash retrieval operation. He had night vision goggles on. He flipped them up and down, looked at them a couple different ways, and it was still just highly anomalous, going through the various ways you can look at it through his night vision goggles. And by the way, I'm sure he had the best night vision goggles money can buy as part of this elite, incredibly covert and secretive operation. He said the egg was about 20 feet, about the size of a large SUV, no seams, pearly white, metallic pearly white. And he went on to say that he's seen so many different kind of things, and prior to this happening, and nothing from his past looked like this. This was completely anomalous. It was inconsistent with anything he's ever seen before. And he says that it wasn't just him that had that perspective. He said it was his entire team who knew they were dealing with something extraordinary. Now that's important. Why is that important? It's simple why it's important. It's important because he's referencing his team. That puts you on the line objectively, does it not? If you reference your team, they can subsequently come out and say, yes, I knew Jake Baker and I don't know what he's talking about. So it is not trivial that he's referencing his team, just as, equally so, it is not trivial that he said that ranking members of the UAP task force told him that what he dealt with that night with the egg was not of human origin. And they also told him that that was not a one-off, this is a regularly occurring situation. So he is giving us details that could get him in a lot of trouble if he's lying or mistaken. Let's make that very, very clear before we move on. Okay. During this process, he doesn't know what the object was, other than he thinks it was non-human intelligence. He was security and transportation. He moved it and loaded it onto a truck, but it would be taken to a secure facility. Once it gets loaded onto a truck and it's delivered, he's out. He doesn't get to go into the secure facility. So that he did not fulfill that role. Okay. Now I saw the footage with the egg, and now that's what I'm going to talk about. What did I think of the footage with the egg, with the rope, the pulley, holding it attached to the helicopter? Well, some people on X are saying that's like a literal egg that I actually ate about an hour ago. I had some eggs an hour ago. So they think that someone's hoaxed this by just using an egg that was bought at the supermarket. Maybe that's true. And if that's true, and someone can actually prove that instead of just saying it without proving it, without showing proof, anyone can have a hypothesis. A toddler can have a hypothesis. That doesn't mean it's true. So if it ends up true that what he showed was an actual egg that someone bought from the grocery store, and that's proven, then obviously my entire opinion will change on this entire thing. Believe it or not, I do change my opinion on things when new proof arises. And I've never claimed for a second I know that what Jake Baker claims happened did. All I said is I find it compelling, and I want to continue watching the story. And I support him. I support him for coming forward. It was the right thing to do. Some of you, almost seems like you wish he wouldn't have come forward because he couldn't prove it. And I just think that is radically foolish, because maybe that's just not how the world works. Maybe that's just not the real world. This is not a movie, and the fact that disclosure might take, another year or so exemplifies that this is not a movie. You might not just get this big hero who comes in with the smoking gun evidence and shows it to the world. Maybe it just doesn't work that way. By the way, if the U.S. government and other governments were able to conceal this from the world for so long, then why would anyone think it would be so simple to ultimately completely break the cover up? I don't understand that logic. It doesn't make sense to me. Let's continue. Okay. Yeah, so the egg was suspended in a cradle. It looked clear to me. But let's put it this way. Let's say it really was an alien craft that was pearly white and seamless. It would look a lot like an egg, wouldn't it? What about a pearly white seamless egg would scream out, "This is non-human intelligence"? Tell me, I don't know. Is the idea that because it could be an egg, therefore we should ignore it? I'm lost. It's inconclusive. But even if we had even if the video was able to have a complete close-up to that egg, it would still look like a pearly white spherical object. You would still not be able to discern that it is of alien origin, would you? Would you? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. Let's keep it funky. Let's keep it real here. Good arguments only. This is the good argument zone. You know what I'm talking about? Not bad arguments, but the good argument zone. Okay. He said something like there was another object two objects. One was the egg. So maybe he's referencing another object that he retrieved with his helicopter. The other we call 8 gong. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but that's how I perceived it when he said it. 8 gong is a flying disc with 8 delineated sections from looking down. Now, why is this significant when he said from looking down? The reason it's significant is because that's his vantage point. Because he's a helicopter operator. So when you pick something up with the helicopter, you look down at it, right? He's not on the ground. He's in the helicopter. So it looked like a classic flying saucer. Now, one of the things that I would have asked Jake Barber that Ross Coulthart didn't is I would have said, is there any data or proof that the egg was ever airborne at any given time, or that the 8 gong, as they call it, or flying disc was ever airborne? I think that would have been an important question. I don't know if Ross Coulthart asked it. Okay. Picks up one of the pros. Okay. So let me take a sip of some disclosure soda, if you don't mind. We're 28 minutes in. It might be another 45 minutes or so. Stick with me if you can do it. Everything looking good? Yep. Okay. So this is where it starts to get really weird. Now this is where we go into woo-wooville. Population infinity. And why I say that is because, you know, if the mystics are right, if the entire universe is at least partly consciousness. I'm not going to give you my full metaphysic theory because I'm going to save that for another video. But let's just say it's largely consciousness. Then the whole universe is woo from our standpoint, at least. Okay. So I think when he's transporting the egg, this is where things get really woo-woo and crazy. And by the way, if you don't believe it, that's 100% great. I'm not here to start a cult. I think people get me wrong in so many different ways. I'm just covering the UFO news, right? Obviously, we don't have proof that what he said is true, but let me just cover it. Is that okay? Let me just cover it. Okay. So this is where it gets weird. He's delivering the egg. He starts feeling odd, extremely emotional. Maybe the closer he gets to picking up the egg, is when the emotion starts, or when he picks up the egg. I don't know, but it begins to overwhelm him. He experiences an intense hybrid of sadness and happiness and beauty and solemnness. And while he's operating his helicopter, it was very disruptive to him because he had a very practical responsibility at the time, obviously, which is to operate a helicopter in the mountains at night. You kind of don't want to crash your helicopter at night, if you understand. And as this was going on, he was wondering, what's wrong with me? He's questioning himself. Is it stress? Is it stress? Is it late? Okay, so now I have a better picture. All of these feelings were emerging within him as he was coming over the object. So apparently before he was able to hook into the object with his helicopter. Okay. So he has overwhelming emotion. And at some point he feels like something connected to him. He says it like something has tuned into him or tuned into his soul and was providing him with some sense of guidance on what to do and how profound that what he was doing was. It's easy for me to Monday morning quarterback, right? Ross did a great job. But after the fact, in retrospect, I would ask him, could you, Mr. Barber, Jake Barber, could you clarify or give some details on what that sense of guidance constituted. And what do you mean it was relaying to you the profundity of what you were doing? I mean, when you really think about it, that's an extraordinarily fascinating thing for him to say. That the object tuned into him and tuned into his soul, as he put it, and was providing him with some sense of guidance on what to do. What does that mean? I almost wonder if he would say that in the moment he knew that this was not going to stay with him, this experience. This was not going to be just something that occurred during this recovery operation, but he was going to tell a story later, which was going to kick over another domino within the process that we're in, leading us to the new world. That's what I wonder. Anyways, let's continue. It was so overwhelming for him. Let me just make sure that the volume's still working and it's still on. Okay. This experience for Jake Baker was so overwhelming that he began to cry. And he said, while he was crying, he felt like, I'm confused. Why am I crying at the same time that I'm picking up this object? Do I abort the mission? He even asked himself, should I abort the mission? He said, I did my best to focus on my particular cues to do this kind of work. What does that mean? I don't think picking up something with a helicopter is simple. I'm sure it's incredibly refined and complex. And if you do something wrong, you could probably crash and die. Obviously he didn't go into those details, but I think when you're picking up something with a helicopter, you make one little mistake and it could probably go south really quick. And that's probably why his overwhelming emotions was something to be concerned about while he was engaging this operation. Okay. So he was able to hook it up, even with all these emotions, hook the egg up to his helicopter, and he flew away. In between the pickup and the drop site was 20 miles in between. That is really interesting. That is not a trivial detail. Let's dig into that. That means that there was an American government facility 20 miles from where this thing crashed or landed. And frankly, I don't think Mr. Baker underscored or conveyed whether it was crashed or landed. My impression now? I think it was landed. David Grush has spoken about this situation. Some of these craft land, some of them crash. Now I'm going to, some of them land, some of them crash. Grush talked about how sometimes the vehicles would be abandoned. What's going on? Does the legacy program even know what's going on? Or are they just spitballing it? Cosmic spitballing it, baby. Let's cosmic spitball. You know what I'm saying? Let's play footsie with non-human intelligence. Bring in craft, one way or the other, through their psychic teams. We'll get into that a little bit later, or however else they're doing it. Did they make an agreement with these non-human intelligences? And they're just fulfilling their agreement that they made many decades ago by landing them on their range. Remember, in between where the craft crashed or landed and where he flew it to with his helicopter was only 20 miles. This is why this contributes to why I think these are landing or crashing on grounds that, like Area 51, test ranges. I mean, he called it the range, for God's sakes. It doesn't appear to me that these are just things crashing in like the middle of a national park in the United States. It's more complicated than that. And this is the depth and the texture and the complexity of the mystery. And this is some high level stuff. And they are keeping it from the president. They are keeping it from the Congress. They are keeping it from the American people. They are keeping it from all 8 billion of us. It's a tragedy. This should not be something this powerful, engaging with higher intelligences that are more evolved than us, been here maybe for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, might be 1,000,000 years ahead of us, maybe 10,000 years ahead of us. I don't know, but this is too profound. What are these legacy programs doing? What is the Department of Defense doing, who are in control of the secrecy? If this is all true, if this is all true, caveated 1,000,000 times, what are they doing? I want to be involved. I want you to be involved. I want 8 billion human beings to be involved. Do you understand? I don't want it to just be a legacy program. I don't want it to just be the Department of Defense, the CIA, the NRO, whatever other three-letter intelligence community is engaging this. I want to know how weird my universe is. Can I not know how weird my universe is? Am I asking too much? This is my heritage. The total expanse of the universe is my heritage. The oneness of God is my heritage. The infinite is my heritage because I'm a piece of it all. And they're holding this back from me. They're holding this back from you. They're holding this back from every nation on this planet. And it is wrong, and we need to put an end to it. Let me take a sip of Disclosure soda. Do you mind? Thank you so much. You're so kind. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's continue. So he said, while this was all going on, he's picking up the egg. He said, I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit I had ever been possessed by. Like something was inside me, but a sense of sadness at the same time. Never had an experience like this before. A very feminine energy. Felt like the spirit of God, but not in a masculine sense. Wasn't like a soul. It was like a frequency. I was connected with it. It has stayed with me since that point and is guiding me now. And it's what's giving me protection now. Oh my God. That sounds like right out of the Avatar movie, does it not? That's like right out of the Avatar movie, son. Let me make sure this is working. I want to make sure the audio's going and everything else. Everything looks cool. Okay. We got to pick this apart. There's no way we can just frolic. We can't just frolic away from that like nothing happened. We got to pick this apart. Okay. Whew. This is difficult for me. Obviously, there was something about this egg that was connecting with him psychically. The question then emerges, was there anything even biological in the egg? For the love of God, what is inside the egg? Are there non-human intelligences inside the egg? Or, alternatively, was one of these intelligences beaming into his mind these feelings at the same time he was coming near or above the egg, right? Various scenarios can be true. We have to think in a nuanced way about the various possibilities. We can't just make assumptions. Now, I put a lot of stock into these descriptions he gave. Now, let me tell you why. First of all, I didn't get the impression he was lying. Maybe he's mistaken. Maybe he believes this happened and it didn't happen. Sure, but that's different. I did not get the impression he was lying. He seemed incredibly sincere to me. And based upon that, I would not be surprised if he actually had these feelings. Go ahead and read my Medium article. I had a telepathic message when I was 14, or at least that's what I remember. And during my telepathic message, I felt ecstasy as I received my telepathic message. And I felt a tear. I distinctly remember a tear flowing down my cheek because the ecstasy or the bliss was so overwhelming that my tear ducts responded. So maybe we live in a weird universe that encompasses outcomes and experiences that we can't understand or don't understand. Now, I want to caveat that I'm not convinced necessarily that whatever made him have those feelings comes from a positive source. Well, that would be an assumption. You're allowed to make an assumption, but if you make an assumption, we still have to recognize that it is an assumption. I don't really know. I don't even have an opinion. Why do I need to have an opinion? I'm just going off what he said. I don't need to extrapolate from that whatever gave him those feelings was necessarily coming from a good place. And it gets even more complicated than that. We got to go deep. We got to go nuanced. What if, because bear in mind, there are rumors, Grush has conveyed this rumor before, or theory or hypothesis, that some of these species, if you want to call them that, don't get along. You don't think they can manipulate us? You don't think that they can make us think one thing when the other thing is true? Why is that not on the table? I'm not saying that's the case. Maybe it is coming from a very wise and loving source. It could be. I'm not saying that's not the case, but I'm also not willing to make any assumptions. Not for me. I'm not going to police your perspective. You want to make an assumption? It's a free country. By all means. I'm giving you my perspective. I'm giving you my perspective. Because I think the possibilities are vast. And we can't make an assumption merely based on face value. Because face value is not always the truth. Face value is not always the truth. Even if we want it to be. Even if we desire it to be. Even if it's inspiring for us to perceive the face value as true, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Okay. So if there are various civilizations that are fighting each other, maybe one of the civilizations found it advantageous to beam those feelings into Jake Baker at the very moment he was picking up that egg. And maybe the species behind that egg had nothing to do with those feelings Jake Baker was experiencing. You don't think non-human intelligence can engage in counterintelligence? You don't think non-human intelligence can influence us in ways that it wants to because that's its interest? Oh, that's against the rule? Who made that rule? How do you know? I'm encouraging you to think complex because we just don't have enough data to make any assumptions at this point. Either way, regardless of what the truth is, I applaud Jake Baker for what he did. I support him. I support his colleagues, and I support others who will come forward because I don't have the hubris to say I know what's true. And I think that's a big mistake that some of the skeptics make. They want you to believe their gospel. Their gospel is that this is not true, that the U.S. government is not covering up UFOs, never was, that we are alone in the universe in terms of anything engaging our planet. They want you to swallow that completely whole and not question it. And I'm telling you, they don't know. Just as I don't know that Jake Baker is telling the truth. Everything looks good. I don't know Jake Baker is telling the truth. But I do know that we have 70 years of UFO history. 70 plus. Of people from all over the world coming forward. And a lot of their stories align in terms of details. They didn't know each other. They didn't read UFO books. So I think something is here. Right? I need to come up with some kind of syndrome. Because there were skeptics that didn't want the UAP Disclosure Act to get passed. Which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And they probably don't want Jake Baker coming forward, right? Because they already know the truth. He's lying or he's deluded. But I would tell the skeptic, you don't know that. You don't know if there's a God. You don't know if consciousness exists outside of the mind or if it's completely tethered to the mind. There are a lot of mysteries in this universe. Let's see where this goes. Let's have a little bit of open-mindedness. Unless you just believe the mind virus will persist for eternity. The mind virus will never go away. After December 16th, 2017, when the New York Times article dropped, we are forever going to be in this mind virus bubble, as if that makes sense. At a certain point, in my opinion, you have to say, you know what? Even if it's a low probability, maybe there's something to this. At a certain point, you have to say that from a rational standpoint, in my opinion. Are we there yet? I don't know. But we're certainly moving in that direction. This whole thing has not taken a U-turn. Now, if someone proves that egg in the video from the NewsNation special, if they prove that really wasn't, someone bought that at the grocery store and hanged it from a helicopter or from a pole because they wanted to put on this big hoax, great. Then that would be devastating for the UFO subject. And the world would change as a result. The world would change as a result of that, as it concerns the UFO subject. Great. Let's continue. Now, Ross Coulthart said exactly what happened to him, Jake Barber. He's not the only one. It's happened to others. Okay, that's not trivial. That's significant. So, according to Ross Coulthart, from what I understand, the emotional experience that Jake Barber had when he came in close proximity to the UAP, it's happened to other people. This is not a one-off. So now you have to say, well, if that's true, then maybe they're all delusional. Maybe they're just all delusional. They've never had any experience remotely like this their entire lives. And then all of a sudden they get near a UAP and they have this experience. What a coincidence. Or maybe the object had a lot of radiation, and radiation makes you feel like you're being embraced by some higher intelligence. Maybe. I'm open to it all. I don't know. Let's just continue. So he's convinced, Jake Barber is convinced he connected telepathically to an NHI. But that brings me back to the question, was there an NHI in the egg? And if there wasn't an NHI in the egg, why was he getting that connection just because he was close to an egg? Was there like some kind of crystal in there where the NHI can communicate through? Was the NHI communicating from some other source directly into his mind as he got close to the egg? Or alternatively, and would be perfectly wild, were there NHI in that egg? And is there some aerospace company out there trying to drill that MF open to see what's inside? Let me take a sip of some disclosure soda. Oh, man. All right, where are we at? 50 minutes. So here's where it gets even more woo, right? The woo escalation is continuing. It's continuing. So apparently there are people that, now this is, look, if you're skeptical by this, I totally understand. But I would do a little pushback. Not because your skepticism isn't justified, but it's kind of strange to say, I believe non-human intelligence is engaging our world and evades proof by our institutions. But the idea that someone can summon them, well, that's a bridge too far. Come on, man. That doesn't fly. That's absurd. I'm sorry. You can't have, it's a silly double standard. If you've already gone so far that you think non-human intelligence is engaging our world and it can evade proof by our institutions, then you probably shouldn't make such a big deal about the idea of someone summoning it. I'm not saying I believe people are summoning it. I don't know. But if non-human intelligence is here, it's not necessarily going to operate according to our subjective expectations, is it? I don't think so. Okay. So this is where it gets even weirder. Jake Barber, and look, I took notes the best I can. You're going to have to watch the actual program to get it all perfectly. But according to my notes, he thinks the object was invited to land by the psionics team, summoned by a special team with special abilities. A psionic person is someone with a predisposition to extratemporal abilities and sensitivities. Okay. So, wow. I mean, that's wild. And I'm just keeping an open mind, everybody. That's just what I'm doing. I'm just keeping an open mind, and I 100% support Jake Baker. Doesn't mean I have to believe, but I also don't disbelieve. I support him because what if he's right? He's doing the right thing. He believes what he's saying. If he believes what he's saying, why would he sit in his basement and not come forward with this information? So this sounds like the Navy SEALs of like CE5ers. The Navy SEALs of CE5ers. If this ends up true, and I don't know if it will, then legacy programs have people that have developed capabilities to summon non-human craft. Okay, that's what was in the special. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. So Ross Coulthart, I think he said, "What did you discover they were being used for in the program? Certainly a desire to explore that perhaps UAP could be summoned, communicated with, could be controlled, could be persuaded to land, all by people with psionic abilities." He said, I think Jake Baker said, "I saw this happen." Allegedly, they use their mind to engage with these objects using modalities such as meditation. So let's just do a thought experiment. Let's just do a thought experiment. Let's say that's true. So for the sake of discussion, that's true. Then if someone else could learn to do that, then they could get UAP to land anywhere. Unless they're only willing to land in a U.S. military training range, which could be true. We don't know. But interestingly, Jake Baker and his colleagues are starting a company called Skywatcher, which we'll get a little bit into more in a bit, where the intention is to do what these legacy programs are doing. Retrieve craft and presumably use psionic operators, let's call them psionic operators, to summon the craft to come down to land or to crash or whatever's going on. So if it's true that people can summon them in the way that has been reported, then theoretically this new enterprise or effort that Jake Baker will be a part of or is a part of could get us disclosure and bypass the U.S. government. And I thought that's what the people wanted who are so antagonistic to government disclosure. There are people on Twitter who are so antagonistic to government disclosure. Well, now you got Jake Baker, who's claiming exactly what Stephen Greer claims, but on a much higher level. But you're not going to support Jake Baker, are you? Because it's too mainstream, right? Do I got that right? I hope not. I hope I'm just being overly cynical. Okay. Then Ross Coulthart said, oh no. So Don Paul, so this is another witness who was a special forces operator, maybe for Delta Force, along with Jake Baker, has seen what psionics can do. There are multiple psionic assets, which means people with these abilities. They know they can do special things. They don't know if it's a byproduct, and I couldn't finish my notes. Maybe a byproduct of something like, I don't know, training of some sort. I don't know. Or encountering UAP. I don't know. So they don't know if it's a byproduct or if they were born with this ability, but they are capable of using it. And then Ross Coulthart goes on to say, there is an ontological shock for many people watching this. We're all being told aliens visiting this planet aren't real, and telepathy and psychic ability is rubbish. Jake Baker responds, I think it's going to be an ontological relief, because I think everyone knows deep down there is more to life than what we're being told or experiencing. Not only is it not shocking, but it should be welcomed. Let me take some disclosure soda on that note. I agree with Jake Baker on this. I think the vast majority of humanity knows, even if it's just on an intuitive level, that this world cannot be relegated to flesh and blood, material, rock, water, oxygen, steel, earth, oxygen, molecules, and so forth. That there's something beyond this entrenchment that we experience. And if there was a way to make that final reality understood to all 8 billion of us, instead of it being an ontological shock, it would be a relief. I agree with that. I do. And I think there's so much stigma surrounding the perception in some respect. Although it's a weird double standard, because we often have permission to believe in God, but we don't have permission to believe that we can have our own anomalous experiences. So what does disclosure really represent in this framework? Disclosure represents a new world where our understanding and perception of reality radically shifts. The idea that disclosure would merely be relegated to the discovery of non-human intelligence engaging our world doesn't seem like it captures the full brunt or breadth of what disclosure will actually capture. If you look at UFO history, it is very strange. People who have encounters with UAP often have anomalous experiences associated with those encounters. Now, does that mean that it's interdimensional? No, it does not. I reject that assumption. It's a very seductive assumption. It's a beautiful assumption, but it's still an assumption. I mean, there are stories of human beings bilocating, are there not? There are stories of Catholic sages levitating, are there not? So the idea that non-human intelligence may do these things at a more advanced level means that they're from an interdimensional location. I'm not convinced of it. I'm not saying it's not true. Might be. I'm just not convinced of it. It's a hypothesis. There's a lot of hypotheses on the table. The new world is not about knowing the truth. The new world is not about having the answers. The new world is about embracing the questions. It's about embracing the questions. That's the new world. I'm sorry to break it to you. That's the new world. I'm going to take a sip of some disclosure soda. And as we progress into the new world, maybe we'll get some of those answers. And at the same time, maybe the more answers we get, the more questions we'll have. Can you handle that? Can you handle that? Okay, let's continue. So yeah, I love the term ontological relief. That's awesome. Now, there's a lot of nuance here because Jake thinks that his life might have been shortened by coming in close proximity to these UAP. So there's a little bit of a contradiction here. On the one hand, coming in close proximity to the UAP seemed to have elicit incredible feelings of love and ecstasy, and yet such experiences might shorten his life. Jake and his teammates have suffered serious injuries, becoming physically ill and going to the hospital. Dr. Gary Nolan agrees that these are real injuries associated with their encounters with these UAP. And I think what Dr. Gary Nolan said, that his first impression is that it's radiation. What's going on? Do these entities not know that when the people working for the legacy program come in close proximity to the UAP, that they're going to have a bad reaction to the technology? Are they oblivious to that? These are questions we have to ask, because there is a contradiction there that needs to be explored. Now, Jake Baker was asked, what do you think the NHI want? And he responded, I feel like they are guiding us. He even said that encountering these objects elicited the most beautiful experience he's ever had in his entire life. We need to examine that more. If he's not lying, then there is something about these UAP that are causing him to feel that. You don't just nonchalantly state that something caused you the most beautiful experience in your life unless something significant happened, unless you're mentally unwell. And I am simply not going to assume that he's mentally unwell. It's a counter argument that does not impress me at all. He's probably accomplished more than many of us could ever hope to. And those accomplishments required him to pass polygraph tests, potentially, tests regarding his mental stability. So let's hold off on assuming that he's lying or delusional, because it's not clear that he is. Just because you believe there can't be anything here doesn't mean there isn't anything here. That's just not how the world works. Never has worked that way, doesn't work that way, and it never will work that way. So I think Coulthart said the UAP may have shortened his life, not just improved his life. And another part of the special is he talked about how he transported mystery boxes with his helicopter. So these were like wooden craters or some kind of material, and he doesn't know what's inside those craters or materials. He did this all the time. Something inside of those boxes impacted his health, apparently. And what's interesting is whatever's in those boxes, guess what? Jake Baker and anyone with him are given the authority to use lethal force if anyone tries to snatch them. So whatever's in these boxes that he's been picking up with his helicopter are extremely valuable to the U.S. government. They're willing to kill to protect it. And so after picking up these boxes, him and everyone on his team got extremely sick, physically ill. Everyone on his team. And they went to the hospital. Now, if he's making this up, then maybe next week we'll have someone that was on his team that will say, no, Jake Baker's lying. Do you understand that he's bringing up other people that worked with him? If you're lying, that's one of the most non-strategic things you can do, because there's always the potential that they're going to come forward and say, that didn't happen. He said within weeks, all his hair was lost. His skin was lopping off within a couple of days of picking up those mystery boxes. His skin was lopping off like a severe sunburn. He also developed a severe heart murmur that he never had before. Now, to be fair, one of the things that I would ask Jake Baker, and if you're watching this, Jake Baker, I would love to interview you at some point, but of course you're not obligated. Do you think your encounter with the white egg also caused you health problems, or was it only with the mystery boxes? Anyways, Dr. Gary Nolan believes through the interaction with these mystery boxes that he would pick up with his helicopter that he was exposed to radiation. And that this happened to 4 or 5 other individuals coming down with the same symptoms right after their deployment. Gary Nolan underscored that's just too big of a coincidence for it to not be radiation. Now, I think it was Ross Coulthart who rightly asked, could what caused these symptoms merely have been radioactive material that the military uses regularly? And Jake Baker doesn't believe so, which makes sense. He says, if the Air Force knew what they were working with that night, and so maybe he is referencing the egg, I don't know. They have radiological, so if the Air Force knew that what he was working with that night had radiological elements in it, there would be special procedures they'd be given to protect their health. So the Air Force actually didn't really understand what was in these boxes. And what's in those boxes, those mystery boxes, may have been non-human intelligence hardware. I need to take a sip of Disclosure soda. This is a deep mystery, friends. This is a profoundly deep mystery, friends. What is going on? This story blows my mind. You have people, part of a psionic-like team, reportedly summoning UAP to a military air range or Air Force range, I'm assuming, test site owned by the US government. And then you have people picking, transporting boxes with mystery items in them because, there's a lot of questions. We need, in the coming days and weeks, we're going to need more answers and more specificity, but we're on the right track. Now, the show gets into Airman John Burroughs. And this is a perfect example. We have to be careful. If you're familiar with UFO history, then you should be reticent to say, oh, this is too woo-woo or this doesn't make sense. Because UFO history repeats itself over and over again. This is nothing new. These are stories that have been repeated over and over again. People having health issues, that's not a new concept. If it happened to Jake Baker and his colleagues, guess what? It's happened to people within UFO history as well. Airman John Burroughs was granted full medical disability. He claimed he suffered that medical issue. I think he had heart problems as a result of his encounter with a UAP, a small triangular UAP during the Rendlesham Forest UAP incident. Only after John McCain intervened to get his medical records declassified were his medical expenses covered and was he properly treated by medical professionals. So Jake Baker having these weird injuries, nothing new, not when it comes to UFO history. So now we'll get into Skywatcher. Oh no, we're not into Skywatcher yet. Where are we at? 71 minutes. I don't care. We're going until we're done, baby. It is what it is. If you stay with me the whole time, you deserve a shirt that said, I survived UFO Jesus' live stream. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So this is where it gets really interesting. I was quite fascinated by this part. And if anyone is making this up, which is possible, they have a great imagination because this part is really, really interesting. So his skills, that's Jake Baker and his colleagues, were also needed for private companies involved with the top secret program. So companies that are contracted by the legacy crash retrieval and back engineering program, I'm assuming. His task at this point was to recover HVTs, which stands for high value targets, something called Panasonic Tough Books. And if I pronounce that wrong, please forgive me. These Panasonic Tough Books contain data about UAP. They are worth millions of dollars to the right buyer. They were planted in the high Sierras, so I'm assuming the United States. And his team arrived to pick them up. Well, here's where it gets weird. Someone already took the hard drives. Before we move further, I want to get into more detail about what I think these are. The legacy program obviously has a much better picture of what these UAP are doing, where they're operating. And maybe the psionic team that can summon them is part of this equation. But either way, it's like they have these sensors set up in areas where I guess there's a lot of UAP activity. And these sensors are picking up valuable data that I assume would be valuable to the legacy program or aerospace companies, potentially because it helps them understand how the technology works or helps them become better at monitoring UAP, whether in the oceans or in our atmosphere or even near Earth or orbit. I don't know. But either way, it does sound like these are like sensor units. Anyways, here it says, the next piece of intel that came through led us to a high altitude lake. And we found the hard drives 25 feet underwater. Someone is going through a lot of effort in order to hide these things. Okay, we need more specificity. If these hard drives are worth so much money to the right buyer, why would anyone put them in a lake? Why would they not just keep them and sell them to the highest bidder? Was it another NHI species that put them in the lake? Right? You're always going to have to maintain this level of nuance when we dive into these stories. If your bias is that anything that's bad is the government, anything that's good is the non-human intelligence, you are creating a story in your head that may be so far from reality. This might be much more complex and nuanced than you're willing to imagine. And you have to have that intellectual humility because that is a part of the new world. Many UFO gurus have led you astray, in my opinion, because they have a narrative that they've fallen in love with and they want you to believe that narrative. But what if they don't know what they're talking about? What if the legacy programs don't even have a clear picture on what's going on? How are you going to have a clear picture? Wake up. Disclosure soda. Wake up. Okay, see if everything's working. Okay. Let's continue. Okay, so they went out again to pick up these hard drives. The very next time we went out, that's Jake Baker and people that were with him, things got strange. Intel's context changed. Rhythm and style changed. Intelligence kept changing. I don't understand. Like, don't they know exactly where these hard drives are? We need more specificity, which I'm sure we'll get. But anyways, things happened that made him concerned about the situation. But they ended up going anyway to retrieve these hard drives. When they got to where the HVT's high-value targets were, they were gone. And it was clear that shots had been fired. Whatever was on the computers was a secret so important that it was worth fighting for. That's my commentary. I believe. Maybe not. The situation has changed. his team was caught in the middle of some kind of skirmish or war. And their lives being in the middle of that were on the line as they were going to retrieve the hard drives. And they were concerned that they were being set up or prepared for the one thing that they were always that was always offered to them as employers, or as the employees, it was always offered to the employers, which is plausible deniability. And I think Jake Baker thought that, well, he said something like, we were perhaps going to be the hidden hand that gets severed. The impression I get from this is that they thought that maybe they were coming into a trap and they were all going to get murdered. That's my take on it, at least. And then another individual working on the retrieval team with Jake Baker, he also believes they were set up with that retrieval. And it was stated that people have lost their lives in these activities. Okay, so Ross Coulthart says, do you think the private aerospace program that contained you, I guess, meaning hired you and questioned you, I'm not really sure, decided to kill you? To which I think Jake Baker said, someone masquerading as someone employed by the company was determined to kill them. I'm not going to go into the weeds of this because it gets really complicated. I think you're better off watching it in its totality to get into the further developments regarding this, because it is confusing and it's a little bit too hard to try to decipher. But either way, just know that Jake Baker is intent on creating a company called Skywatcher. They believe that they'll be able to generate the same high quality sensor data and photography that everyone wants, that reportedly the US government has. So frankly, I think it's fair to say that whether they said it directly or not, they're claiming that if the US government does not disclose the truth about this presence, this non-human presence, their personnel at Skywatcher will be able to do. And they're also recruiting people from within the program that worked on the crash retrieval and back engineering program to become part of Skywatcher. And this gets really interesting. According to Jake Baker, this Skywatcher program is coordinating with people within government agencies. So government agencies on some level are involved. Maybe people in government agencies that want to end to the cover-up. They from Skywatcher are getting their funding from venture capital. It's not public funding, like from people like us. There was more about their experiences summoning privately. Gary Nolan was part of that. I'm not going to go into it. You're going to have to watch the program, not James Fox's documentary, but you're going to have to watch this special by NewsNation. Okay, we are 80 minutes in, and I'm going to say my last words. So I really appreciate every one of you staying with me for this live stream. It's wonderful. I feel like we're having a picnic together. And Jake Baker was extremely clear in his statement that I told you from the outset, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it's vital. It's absolutely vital. This is the quote that he said in the NewsNation special that I shared with you at the beginning. I think it's an exact quote, but bear in mind, I was writing or typing as fast as I could. This Jake Baker quote is as follows, and I quote, "I'm not here to make anyone believe in anything. It's exhausting. You will know us by our fruits. Stay tuned in and watch what our new project will do and prepare to be dazzled." I think that's fair. I think that's fair. He's not asking anyone to join his cult or to believe. He's not hedging his bet by any stretch of the imagination. He's telling you that he's going to bring the goods. And by implication, he's saying that if he doesn't bring the goods, hold him accountable. What else do you want from him? He's putting it all on the line. If he doesn't bring the goods, then by all means, hold him accountable. I will too. But at the same time, can we give him a little grace? Can we give him some time? Can we see where this is all headed? Do we have to be so angry because this special didn't reach our expectations? It's January 18th, the beginning of 2025. Let's see where this all goes. New hearings, new witnesses coming forward. Some people theorize Jim Clapper's coming forward. I think he was the first director of national intelligence. And I've theorized, it's not inside information, but it's based upon some things I heard from Ryan Graves' podcast and things that Matthew Pines said. I theorize that Jim Clapper, and I believe that's Jim Clapper. I get his name wrong sometimes, but I've theorized based upon the things they said that he will be in the Dan Farr documentary that should be coming out sometime. So if he went on camera and said the government's lying about UFOs, that will move the needle, in my opinion. If you don't think so, go look at Jim Clapper's work history, and you might change your mind. Now, I know what you're saying. Some of you saying right now, we've had too many whistleblowers. Enough of this. We want proof. Yeah, I want proof too. But we're dealing with incredible complexity, danger, intransigence, death threats, powerful interests. Have a little patience. The New York Times story came out in late 2017. We've made so much progress. The problem is some people don't register progress. They only see it as black and white. We either get proof or nothing else matters. And I just don't think that's how the world works. Stay vigilant, stay skeptical, but don't become so skeptical that you start making up things and start passing on hypotheses as gospel, because then you just become another kind of believer and you're not a skeptic anymore. No, you're not. Okay. Almost an hour and a half. I'm gonna cut it in about a second. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support my channel, the more support I get, the more fire is lit underneath me. I'm a human being. You can check out my merch shop. You can become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You can give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below. Or you could just slap a like on this bad boy, and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.